There is a warm, amber glow that remains long after the fire of the struggle has gone out. We tell the stories of hope and warmth that survive even the coldest winters of life. Hit subscribe today and keep the glow of great storytelling alive in your heart.
The wine in my glass was a very good Bordeaux. My father always served good wine at his birthday dinners. He said it was the mark of a man who understood value. I used to believe that about him. There were 63 people in the dining room of my father's Winnetka estate that night. His closest friends, his golf partners, the neighbors who had watched me grow up, the colleagues who had attended my law school graduation and called my father lucky to have such a daughter. The long oak table was set with the good china, the kind my mother had picked out before she died, the kind my father had threatened to sell twice when cash was tight and I had quietly paid to keep. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier light and threw little rainbows across the white tablecloths. It looked like a celebration. It was, just not mine. My father, Gerald, stood at the head of the table. He is 67 years old, and he still carries himself like a man who expects rooms to go quiet when he enters them. That night he wore a navy blazer and the watch my brother had given him for Christmas, which I later found out I had actually paid for through a wire transfer my brother claimed was for shared household expenses. My father raised his glass and smiled the way he smiles when he's about to say something he has been rehearsing for weeks. He said he had an announcement. He said it was his birthday, and birthdays made him think about legacy. He said he wanted to spend the years he had left knowing the things he had built were in the right hands. Then he reached into the breast pocket of his blazer and produced a folded document. He announced that he was transferring full ownership of Harlan Group Holdings to my brother, Marcus. The room applauded. Marcus stood, grinning the way he grins when he wins at golf, which is to say with his whole chest and very little awareness of the people around him. His wife Diane grabbed his arm and whispered something that made him laugh. She was wearing a bracelet I recognized because I had seen it in a jewelry store downtown 3 weeks earlier. I had thought about buying it. The price tag had said $4,000. I had put it back. My father crossed the room and the two of them shook hands and then hugged, and someone took a photograph, and the applause kept going. I did not applaud. I held my wine glass and watched. Harlan Group Holdings. The real estate portfolio my father had spent 30 years assembling. 11 commercial properties across the Chicago metro area. Current market value, conservative estimate, $17.4 million. The entity I had restructured legally and entirely 4 years ago. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I want to know how far this story reaches. My name is Claire. I am 31 years old. My family thinks I am a corporate attorney who handles paperwork for other people's deals. What I actually do is structure the legal architecture of multi-million-dollar asset transfers. I am the person wealthy families hire when they want to move money in ways that are airtight, invisible, and permanent. I have done it for clients from Seattle to Miami. I have done it without billing a single hour for my own father. When he asked me 4 years ago to help him protect the portfolio from a potential lawsuit brought by a former business partner, I spent 4 months restructuring Harlan Group Holdings into a tiered entity system, a parent LLC with 2 subsidiary operating companies beneath it. Clean, defensible, judgment-proof. My father had signed every document I placed in front of him. He trusted me completely because I had never given him a reason not to. He had also never bothered to read what he was signing because reading things carefully was, in his words, what he paid people like me for. What he had signed, among other things, was a unanimous written consent that designated me as the required co-signatory on any transfer of the parent company's membership interest. Not a formality, a structural requirement. The entity could not move without my signature. Period. He did not remember signing it. I remembered every word. I also held, as compensation for those 4 months of work which my father had never actually paid, a promissory note for $240,000 secured against the parent LLC. He had signed that too. He had called it just a formality for the books, and I had smiled and said yes, something like that. A man who values legacy reads what he signs. A man who values appearances does not. Marcus was still shaking hands around the table when my father found me near the bar. He did what he always does when he wants something from me. He touched my shoulder the way you touch someone you are about to ask a favor of, warm and deliberate. He said I looked beautiful. He said it had been too long since we had all been together like this. He said he hoped I understood. I asked what there was to understand. He sighed, the sigh of a man who has been rehearsing this part too. He said Marcus had a family, a mortgage, 2 kids in private school. He said Marcus needed the stability of something real, something he could build on. He looked at me the way people look at you when they have already decided you do not need what they are taking. He said, "You're doing so well on your own, Claire. You've never needed us the way he has." That sentence, I had been waiting for it for 15 years. Since the year my mother died and my father spent her life insurance payout on a boat and sent me to college on a scholarship I had applied for entirely by myself. Since the year Marcus crashed a car and my father paid the settlement and told me it was a family investment. Since the year I graduated first in my class from Northwestern Law and my father forgot to come to the ceremony because Marcus had a golf tournament that weekend. I had heard that sentence my entire adult life in different forms. You're fine, you're strong, you don't need it. What it always meant was, your strength is the reason I feel comfortable taking from you. I looked at my father and I felt the old familiar weight of it, the pull to say it's fine, to smile, to not make it awkward in front of 63 people. For a moment I was 22 years old again, sitting at a kitchen table being told my needs were an inconvenience. Then the moment passed. I said, "You're right, Dad. Marcus needs this. Let's make sure everything is in order." He exhaled. He patted my shoulder. He said he knew I would understand, that this was why I was his rock, and I thought, yes. Exactly. That is why. He did not see what I was thinking. He never had. Marcus was in the study when I found him. The transfer documents spread across my father's desk, a pen already in his hand. He looked up at me with the particular wariness of a man who has been getting away with things for so long he has begun to expect them to stop. I gave him the warmest smile I had. I said I wanted to congratulate him. I said the portfolio was a remarkable thing our father had built. I said I was glad it was staying in the family. He relaxed. His greed had always been louder than his instincts. I pulled a chair close and sat across from him. I said there was just one thing, a technical item, something the attorney and me needed to flag before he signed, purely procedural. He waved his hand the way he waves at anything involving detail. He said to just handle it. That was what I was there for. I said I needed him to look at page 11 of the operating agreement. He flipped to it with the impatience of a man who considers reading a burden. I pointed to the clause, co-signatory requirement, membership transfer restriction. My name, printed clearly as required executing party. He read it twice. I watched the color of his face change the way weather changes over a lake, gradual and then all at once. He said that couldn't be right. I said it was very right. I had drafted it myself. He said it was a mistake. He said my father hadn't understood what he was signing. He said I had tricked him. I said I had protected him, which was what he had asked me to do, which was what I had spent 4 months doing without payment, and that the promissory note on page 23 would support that characterization clearly. Marcus put down the pen. For a moment, he just looked at me across the desk and I could see him running calculations, trying to find the angle, the pressure point, the version of the story where he still wins. He said, "Claire, come on, this is family. A brother who respects you, asks. A brother who wants to use you appeals to family." I said, "I know, that's why I'm here." He left the study to get my father. I stayed where I was. I straightened the documents on the desk. I took a slow breath. Outside the study door, I could hear the dinner party continuing, glasses clinking, someone laughing at a story. They had no idea the room they were celebrating in had just shifted on its axis. My father came in with Marcus behind him and the tight expression of a man who has been ambushed at his own birthday party. He closed the door. He did not offer me a chair because I was already sitting. He stood behind his own desk, which I noticed, and I thought, that is the dynamic of this entire story in one image. He said this was not what he had intended. I said I understood that. He said I understood that. He said I was being vindictive. He said I had set a trap. I said I had done 4 months of legal work to protect his assets from a $9 million judgment, pro bono, out of loyalty and love, and that the documents were what they were, regardless of anyone's intentions. He said I was his daughter, and I owed him more than this. I had been waiting for that word too. Owed. The word that had followed me my entire life, the invisible debt that grew every time I accomplished something and shrank every time I gave something away. In my family's accounting, my success was a liability I had never finished paying off. I looked at my father and I said, very calmly, "Dad, what do I owe you for? Be specific." He opened his mouth. He closed it, because there was nothing there. The ledger of what I owed was built entirely out of the crime of not needing enough, of being sufficient, of building something sturdy out of the rubble they had left me. I did not owe him. I had simply never collected. Marcus said, "Just sign the transfer, Claire. We'll figure out the note later." I said, "I'm not going to sign the transfer, Marcus." My father said, "Then what exactly do you want?" And here is where I will tell you something about the way I was raised. My father taught me, accidentally, one very useful thing. He taught me that power is not taken. It is structured in advance and exercised with paperwork. He had just never expected me to be paying attention. I opened my bag and removed a second document. I set it on the desk between them. I said that 4 months ago, through my firm, I had acquired the outstanding commercial loan on the Harlan Group's Northbrook property, the one my father had been servicing for 11 years, the one with a balloon payment due in 90 days. I now held the note. I was the lender. The Northbrook property was the anchor asset. Without it, the portfolio's debt-to-value ratio collapsed. My father sat down. I said I had 3 options to offer them. Option 1. I sign the transfer to Marcus. He assumes the note, and I wish them both good luck with the balloon payment and the operating company's current cash flow, which I had reviewed and which was, I was sorry to say, not sufficient to cover it. Option 2. The transfer does not proceed. The portfolio remains in my father's name. I collect the promissory note for my legal work, and everyone goes home. Option 3, which I preferred, my father transfers the parent LLC to me, directly. I absorb the outstanding debt. I pay Marcus and my father each a fair market buyout for their nominal interest, and the family's financial exposure ends today, quietly. Without anyone else in that dining room needing to know what is on page 11 or page 23. Marcus said, "You planned this." I said, "I plan everything. You've known me for 31 years. My father looked at me for a long moment, not with anger, though the anger was there underneath. He looked at me with something I had spent my life trying to earn from him, and it stopped needing around the time I made partner. It was recognition. He was seeing me clearly, possibly for the first time, and discovering that the person he had overlooked his entire life had been very, very busy. He said, "Claire." I said, "Don't." Not cruelly, firmly. "I don't need the speech, Dad. I need a decision." Marcus said he needed to call his attorney. I said that was completely his right and that his attorney would arrive at the same conclusions I just had, but would charge him $400 an hour to do it. The room was quiet for a long time. Outside the door, the party went on. Someone put on music, something low and jazzy, the kind of thing my father plays when he wants to seem cultured. I had always found that detail small. My father picked up the document I had placed on the desk. He read it the way he should have read every document I had ever given him. Carefully, slowly, with the expression of a man discovering that the contract he thought he held had a different name on the signature line than he expected. He signed it. Not with defeat, exactly. With the recognition of a man who had finally been outmaneuvered by someone who had been learning from him for 3 decades without his knowing it. Marcus did not sign anything. Marcus left the study without speaking to me. I heard him tell Diane in the hallway that the party was over, that something had come up, that they needed to leave. I heard Diane ask questions he did not answer. I heard the front door. I stayed in the study for a few minutes after my father left. I looked around at the shelves of business books he had never applied and the golf trophies and the framed photograph of the groundbreaking of the first Harlan property, 1991, my father young and grinning in a hard hat. I had a copy of that photograph in my own office. I had kept it not as sentiment but as a reminder of what a person could build from nothing, which was the one lesson of his I had actually absorbed. I gathered the documents, I put them in my bag. When I walked back into the dining room, the party was still going. Someone had refilled the wine. My father had returned to the table and was speaking to his oldest friend with the practiced ease of a man who performs normalcy fluently. He did not look at me. I spoke to a few people. I answered questions about work, about whether I was seeing anyone, about the condo I had bought in River North. I was pleasant. I was warm. I was exactly who I had always been in that room. The competent one, the steady one, the daughter who did not need anything. The difference was that now the portfolio was mine. A family friend found me near the door as I was getting my coat. She was a woman who had known my mother, who had watched me grow up, and she patted my hand and said I seemed different tonight. Lighter, somehow. I said I felt lighter. She asked if everything was all right with my father and Marcus. She said they both seemed tense. I said some accounting questions had come up, nothing dramatic. She nodded and said I'd always been the responsible one and that my mother would have been so proud. I thanked her. I meant it more than she knew. My father found me at the valet. He had followed me outside without his jacket, and the November air was sharp, and he stood on the front steps with his arms crossed against the cold, and he looked at me the way parents look at children when they realize the children have become someone they do not fully recognize. He said, "I never thought you'd do something like this." I said, "I know." He said, "Your mother would not." I said, "Don't. Please don't use her for this." He stopped. I said, "You've asked me my whole life to be the responsible one." I was. "You asked me to be self-sufficient." I was. "You asked me to handle things quietly, to not make a scene, to understand that Marcus needed more." I understood, and then you tried to give away $17 million of something I legally hold and tell me it was because I didn't need it. I kept my voice even. I am very good at keeping my voice even. It is a professional skill. I don't hold a grudge, Dad. I hold documents. There's a difference. He had nothing to say to that. The car came. I got in. He stood on the steps and watched me leave, and I did not look back because I had spent enough of my life turned in that direction. I drove to my office, not my condo, because that is where I do my best thinking, and because home that night felt like a concept I was still constructing. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon and sat at my desk and looked at the signed transfer document and the promissory note and the Northbrook loan acquisition paperwork, and I thought about how long I had been carrying the weight of being overlooked, and how light the carrying felt now that I had set it down on a conference table and let it become something useful. My phone had 11 missed calls, 7 from Marcus, 2 from Diane, 2 from my father. I read them the way I read opposing counsel's letters, calmly, looking for the argument, finding mostly noise. I did not call back that night. I opened my laptop. I looked at the portfolio documents. 11 properties, 30 years of work, mine now entirely above board, by the letter of every agreement my father had signed without reading. People ask me sometimes why I went into law. They expect an answer about justice or principles or an early interest in debate. The real answer is that I grew up in a house where agreements were made casually and forgotten conveniently, and I needed a language that did not allow for that. Law is the language where things mean what they say and are bound to what they promised. It does not care about dinner table politics or birth order or who needs more. It cares about the document. I had been fluent for a long time. They just hadn't known it. Marcus called one more time at midnight. I let it go to voicemail. He said I had manipulated the situation, that I planned this from the beginning, that it wasn't fair. He was right on all 3 counts, by the way, except for the last one. It was extraordinarily fair. It was, in fact, the first fair thing that had happened in our family's financial history in about 15 years. I blocked his number after that. Then Diane's. Then, after thinking about it for 3 minutes, my father's. Not permanently. Just until the paperwork cleared and the transfer was recorded and the whole thing became fact rather than dispute. Let the lawyers talk. That was what lawyers were for. I sat in my office until 2 in the morning, and then I went home and I slept better than I had in years. And in the morning I made coffee and stood at my window and looked out at the city and felt something I did not immediately have a word for. I tried gratitude, but that was not quite it. Gratitude implies something was given. This had not been given. I tried relief, but that was not it either. Relief implies threat, and I had not been afraid. What I felt was architectural, like a building that had been poorly supported for its entire existence and had quietly, without drama, installed its own foundation in the night. Nothing had collapsed. Nothing had needed to. The structure simply held now on its own terms, as it should have from the beginning. My father called 6 days later from a different number. I answered because I had decided that avoidance was a tool for people who had not yet won, and I had won. He said he wanted to talk. I said I was listening. He said he had made mistakes. He said he had made mistakes. He said he had not seen me clearly. He said he was sorry, and I listened to the whole apology and I assessed it the way I assess all documents, for what it contained and what it omitted, for the subtext of the chosen words. What the apology contained was a genuine acknowledgement that he had undervalued me. What it omitted was any mention of the boat, or the car settlement, or the graduation he had missed, or the 30 years of being told I did not need anything and should therefore expect nothing. I said, "I know you're sorry, Dad. I also know what sorry is worth without amended behavior. So let's see." He said that was fair. I said it was more than fair. I said I would call him next week and we would have dinner, just the 2 of us, and we would talk. Not about the portfolio, about us, about what we were going to build from here. He agreed. I do not know what that will become. I am not a person who projects emotions onto uncertain futures. But I know what I hold and what I am owed and what I am willing to extend, and for the first time in my life, those 3 calculations are all my own. Nobody else's hands are in the ledger. Nobody else's tides the terms. For 31 years, I had been the foundation everyone else built on and nobody named. I had let it happen because I had been taught that invisible support was a form of love, that the strongest one was supposed to bear the weight quietly and ask for nothing and call that family. I was done being unnamed. The building stands, the documents are recorded, the deed is mine, and this time I signed it myself.